We've had nights when it was really blowing, we had boats sitting out there and we just sat on them all night in gear, trying to keep them safe.
They'd be up during the night watching, and there would be boats on the beach the next morning. And I remember one morning before going to school, at least 4 boats up on the beach.
Yeah, any nasty surprises usually happen through the night.
Just hold on, grab the winch and had some interesting days.
We worked their guts out.
Whenever anyone comes home back here to say hello, they feel at home, even though they've left.
We just got that many crayfish.
Fishing today is pretty good.
It's been good. It's been good life, Gary. You know, every family has their ups and downs. But other than that, we've achieved a lot of things in our life.
Chris said this is the best time to be fishing.
The Von Stanke story is a remarkable one, growing from fishing in a wooden dinghy in 1946 to a fleet of 20 boats in 1970, overcoming the forces of nature and fluctuating economics along the way. For many years, the Von Stanke family group were the largest catchers of southern rock lobster in Australia.
In one of our better years, it was like 400 tonne of live to the Chinese market.
I must point out here that the Von Stankes were fishing for rock lobster. We called them crayfish in the old days, but we're supposed to call them lobster today for international marketing purposes. But old habits die hard. You'll hear both terms used throughout this program.
That rock lobster's another Johnny-come-lately word. It was always crayfish for us. Never heard of the word lobster. The only lobsters we knew were the yabbies we caught in the drains as children.
Likewise with the Stanke and the Von Stanke. The Von was dropped during the war years due to German associations. You'll hear both names used throughout this program, if for no better reason than just habit. Anyway, on with the story.
We will begin this story of the Von Stanke family of fishermen with this studio photo of the family taken in the late 1930s. Standing from left are Robert, John and Frederick with James and Powys on the right. Alice is sitting on the left with Myra between her parents, Hercules and Muriel. At this time, Hercules was a fishing inspector, based in Mount Gambier, in the southeast of South Australia. The family owned a fishing shack at nearby Pelican Point. All the boys were to become fishermen. Oldest son Frederick, born in 1918, served in the Australian Air Force during World War II. On return from the war, using his deferred pay, Fred bought 30 acres of land at Carpenter Rocks, formerly known as Cape Banks, fronting Bucks Bay, and began to dabble in fishing. Carpenter Rocks had long been known as prolific crayfish grounds, easily caught from the rocks with a dead rabbit in a Hessian bag.
Grandpa would also bring down the old wheat badge from the shearing shed, you know, with all the smell of things on there, and he'd tie a bit of rope to the end and a pebble on the roof, toss it in, and within a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, he'd pull the bag up and the crayfish would have their claws into the bag, so we had a meal within a half an hour. And Mr. Harrop, he was really a bit before the Stankes as far as trying to develop a market, and he'd take a horse and cart to Mount Gambier with a lot of crayfish, but he had trouble even selling them. So often, on the way home, they'd just dump them on the side of the road.
Following World War II, there was a developing market for frozen lobster tails into America. For the first time, large quantities of lobster could be sold at a guaranteed price. This was very timely for Fred Von Stanke. His first boat was a little 16-foot cutter, named the Office. Fred apparently made some money with this little boat, catching lobster and scale fish, and trapping rabbits in the winter, for in 1948 he acquired the little 30-foot yacht, Dauntless. Fred and his father had a rough and perilous delivery voyage from Adelaide.
They bought a compass, an old second-hand compass, marine compass I believe, from Adelaide before they left, and Dad's father stepped on that and broke it as they headed off, so they had no compass. They ended up steering by when the clouds allowed, by the Southern Cross, and after many days they come into Kingston, so very fortunate they survived. No cabin on the boat, they were wet 24/7.
With the Dauntless, as small as she was, Fred was able to fish for lobster further afield, but conditions were primitive. The catch of lobsters were kept alive in the bay, contained in floating wooden boxes known as coffs. When sufficient were caught, they were carted in his father's 1928 Chev truck over rough sandy tracks to the factory at Port Macdonnell, 40 kilometres away. Soon Fred's 4 younger brothers joined him in the fishing, but Fred was always the senior partner. They prospered and added to their fleet with a motley collection of old boats. One of their early acquisitions was the Hawthorn, a former trading ketch which had seen better days.
I don't know too much about it, only from the history that I've been told that they bought it around. It was a very big boat, and they anchored it in the bay. Apparently it leaked profusely, and they couldn't stop the leak on it. There was a big blow came, and the next thing it's on the beach, and it stayed there for years. And you just, I think before they pulled the centreboard down, would have been there for 40 years, I suppose.
A more successful acquisition was the 50-foot Dolphin. This vessel had formerly been a milk collection boat on the Murray River, named the Union. She was brought out of the river and converted to fishing. The von Stanke brothers bought her from Roy Bateman at nearby Blackfellows Caves, in a sinking condition, repaired and put to work, though she was to come ashore in storms several times. She was to have a major makeover in 1965, and continued to fish for another 25 years, though still favouring the beach. Another acquisition was the 40-foot Nilipper, bought from Jarrett and Redfern of Portland. Then the Princess, seen here being hauled ashore on the old slipway, using an old hand-operated winch. Others were the Islander, sourced from Kangaroo Island, and the Little Cygnet. Another was the old 50-foot Carina. This photo shows her washed up on the beach in a storm, with 2 bulldozers clearing the sand away for her to be hauled ashore for repairs. Boats being washed ashore during storms was not an uncommon occurrence. Bucks Bay was a small and crowded anchorage.
1 year before the fishing season started, a couple of weeks before the fishing season started, there was a big blow and ended up with 6 boats on the beach. And then they had to get them up, get them repaired, and back in and try to start for the start of the season.
When we knew the seas were going to be bad, you would have to go and put out pick ropes, or storm ropes as some people call them. And some of the boats you'd have to put 2 out, and they'd be 50, 80 metres back out off the boats, and then you would lock them up with 1 and 2 picks to help hold them.
Anchors.
Yeah, so you would drag your moorings, and it was that rough at times you would have to be out there and drive them forward. In
gear.
Yeah, and drive up the mooring back out to where it should be to stop hitting the boat behind you, and this could go on all night.
Mostly my uncles and my mum, they'd be up during the night watching, and there would be boats on the beach the next morning. And I remember one morning before going to school, at least 4 boats up on the beach, and then it was a big deal to get them back in, drag them back in with the tractors and the other boats to pull them in. Yeah, I found that really exciting, and everybody, obviously for the adults it would be devastating.
It was very difficult. At one stage there was 27 boats in the bay. The boats would start to drift around, they'd knock into one another, do damage.
They would belt each other from pillar to post. We'd done a lot of those repairs ourselves because you get a boat builder to come and do it, cost too much. So we'd do it. The next summer, when they're all in the water again, they would belt each other up again. It didn't help the case of our old plank boats, that the channel that is very shallow coming in through here. And when the tide's low, they're belting on the bottom, coming in the channel. So that would loosen their planks.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
You know, so it didn't help the cause at all. Whereas, our modern day boats, we can just put the gas into and drag across the bottom.
When I took the John L for a few years, it leaked that much. I used to take a firefight pump, and every 2 hours I'd start the pump up, the pump. That is just what you had to do.
The channel to the sea was comparatively narrow, and the width of safe water was reduced with the height of the swell.
There were times when they went fishing, like the whole fleet would go fishing, or maybe half the fleet, and the sea would make up pretty big during the morning, and my mum used to stress, and we did have some times where we would be standing on the sand dunes watching them come through.
I had a friend with me once, and he looked at me and said, "Are you scared?" I said, "No." I said, "Are you?" He said, not if you're not."
The cost of insuring boats working out of Bucks Bay was such that von Stanke brothers mostly carried the risk themselves. In the 1970s, efforts were made to deepen the channel by blasting the rock, but these proved unsuccessful. The fishermen continue to have an uneasy relationship with the entrance to the present day.
Because those boats, what were they drawing? 4.5, 5.5 feet. Yeah. But outside the channel, the breakers could be 20 or 30 feet high, 2 miles out, and you had to run the gauntlet and wait for your time and then go for it, and try to get in without getting turned sideways for your trouble.
Coming in, you only need a wave to pick you up the wrong way and you start to broach across the front of the wave. You can run out of steering.
So I had the old Soignerie when I started skippering fully sideways, leaning right over. Other boats have been spun around. It can be unpleasant, but you're in the zone and just concentrating on what you're doing.
And the channel's not very wide, a lot of reef there, and they've punched into the reef, punched holes into the side, and sank. The John L sank basically off the middle reef. She was there. I dived on it, actually, trying to patch a hole up so they could suck the water out, but it was just too hard a job, and they ended up dragging it into the beach with one of Gambia earth movers, bulldozers, and pulling it up. She wasn't the only one, the dolphin. She hit reefs coming in.
I suppose we learnt the art of it to get in, and the Cape Banks was the fastest conventional boat going. She could get to the bottom of a breaker and she would stay there as a conventional hull. She was a big broad boat. That was the last one they built of the big boats. But she only drew 3.5 foot, like 14 foot wide. What was she, 46 foot? And she had a big Detroit in her, so once I got down to the bottom of the big rollers, she would stay in front of it like a big surfboard.
And my father, he said he had a relationship with every reef in the bay over the years. So, but the seas, when you get a big following sea, it's you can turn an atheist into a religious person coming in through there.
Yeah, we've had the legs wobble a few times for sure.
I spent a lot of years driving a little 25-footer, so I would get the breakers going over the bow, hitting the cabin, plywood cabin, and hoping that the wave didn't come through the cabin into your face. So.
It is a remarkable fact that in the von Stanke's long association with fishing this wild and rugged coast, no family members' names appear among the 20 on the Carpenter Rocks memorial wall. Though sadly, one deckhand, Kevin Sims, was lost overboard from the Eastern Queen.
I don't think anybody knows what happened. He basically was pulling gear and turned around and he was gone.
Heavy thigh boots were a serious hindrance to anyone who found themselves overboard, as Robert learned from experience when he fell overboard from the John L.
And the other scary part was the thigh boots. They wouldn't come off. Stuck in my legs. Oh, I'm kicking and kicking and kicking. All this time, the boat's in reverse. What a shocking fucking sound that is. Because it's coming towards you. I'm trying to get my boots off to swim away from her. I said to him, push that bloody lever. Because he was on a new deck. Didn't know much about it. But he got me on the boat. I could have went home. I didn't stay there.
You stayed there and all the rest of the year, did you?
Yeah.
In the early 1950s, the 5 von Stanke brothers were joined by 2 brothers-in-law. Ron Guy married Myra von Stanke. Antonio Mira married Leonie von Stanke. There were lots of children.
It was just a really wonderful place to grow up as a child. We were probably wild children. We had the beach and that was our playground. We had the swamp over the back where we were not allowed to go, and we used to go regularly.
It just do what you wanted to do.
I was a bit more fortunate than Chris. I grew up with when all the boats were here and all the boys were here, and it was just a good time.
I can remember sitting at home out the front window, family homes just over there, watching the boats come in, watching Dad come in and watching the older brothers come in.
And from very early memories, I can remember greeting Dad at the beach as many days as I possibly could. And if I was within earshot of Mum, or she would holler out, "Your Dad's coming," and she could she could tell what boats were coming in by the sounds of their motors. So I'd whip down to the beach and wait for Dad, and I would be his greeting committee, and I needed to count the bags of crays that came in, but mostly it was to see what was left in his lunchbox, and it was normally an apple. He had the same lunch every day that was made by Mum the night before. I'd say to Dad the night before, "Can I come fishing tomorrow?" And it depends on the weather, and if it was more than 20 knots I wasn't allowed to go. So yeah, and he'd make me a little hat with a hanky, tie 4 knots in it, and I'd go off with my little fishing hat with him. Yeah, so my introduction was quite an early age. Learning to swim was interesting. We'd go out in the dinghy out to the boats, and usually because we'd have to have a bigger cousin when we were small, and we'd usually thrown off the back of the boat and see how far we got before they'd jump in and help us get back on the boat, and it worked. We all learnt to swim. We went to school at Congarong Primary School. We all went to school there together, and there was no bus, and so sometimes up to 10 or more kids would pile into one car each morning, and off we'd go, sitting on cousins' knees or sisters' knees, and off we'd go to school for the day. And then there'd be they'd be rostered. It'd be Auntie Mary's turn, or Mum's turn, or Auntie Belle's turn, or Auntie Gwen's turn.
As soon as we could work and someone didn't turn up because they had 22 boats, they used to come and wake us up, and we'd have to go fishing, and Robert and I mainly, and we'd say, "We've got to go to school." They'd say, "Well, this is more important than going to school." And I could never work out why it was more important, but as you get older, you work out that they were trying to build a business. And
how old would you have been at that stage?
From 11 on. And that was why 2 of us used to go, because we weren't strong enough. If you had kelp on the float or anything, God, it was hard yakka. So, right from 11, 12-year-old, and then I left school at 15 and a half and went to Melbourne scallop fishing.
Going out on the boats, I always got seasick. I hated it, and that's why I didn't really want to be a fisherman. But, it runs in the family a bit. My son's the same, Dad's the same.
I can tell you a little story about one day. We used to have a Land Rover down there, and the boys loved the Land Rover, so they had their licence. I think they had their licence. And we all piled into the back of the Land Rover. It was a really hot day, and we were going to the Little Blue, and that was a bit of a drive for us from the rocks.
The Little
Blue Lake, just down at Mount Shank. And along the way, the old Land Rover overheated, and because there was no water or anything, and we probably were about we were past the Congarong Primary School, so we were closer to the Little Blue than what we were to home, but we were still in the middle of nowhere. So the big boys, so I reckon there probably would have been about 10 or 12 of us in and on the back of this Land Rover, and I was quite young then, because we had to sit on the back of the Land Rover while the big boys peed into the radiator to get us to the Little Blue Lake. And it was quite successful. We got to the Little Blue, and they used the water from the Little Blue to to put extra water in the radiator, and we had our first swim in the Little Blue Lake, and off we went home again. When we were young, we used to have joint birthday parties because there were so many of us down there. And when they built the shop, there was a big room, which to me seemed like as big as a hall, but it wasn't. It was just a nice big room with some toilets at the end, and was kind of attached to the factory around the corner. But we would have all our joint family get-togethers there, and sometimes there'd be 4 or 5 of us, and we'd all have our cake. But everybody'd come along, bring the food, and we would just have a good old time together.
Backtracking now to 1959, the brothers had prospered sufficiently enough to begin building new boats, rather than acquiring older boats. The first of these was the Hercules, built by Higgs brothers in Geelong. The second was the Kerin Margaret, built at Carpenter Rocks, but built by the fishing crews, supervised by one of the Higgs brothers. Ian von Stanke was barely 12 years old at the time, just big enough to hold the dolly.
When we built the Kerin Margaret and the others were all roved, and you had to have that big steel dolly on your shoulder and someone inside whacking the nails over, and you had to wear the impact on the other end.
The firm of Stanke brothers comprised the 3 older brothers, Fred, Bob and Jack. The 2 younger brothers, Jim and Powys, worked for the company. In 1962, the Stanke brothers acquired the boat-building business in Portland, established by Ron Stewart in 1951. This gave them a prime site to repair older boats and to build new boats. It also gave them safe mooring for the fleet during the winter months. Stewart's former employee, Tony Kettelars, stayed on to manage the business and build boats.
They wanted to replace their old boats with new ones. And over the 7 years that I was there, well, we done 9 of them.
And you refurbished a lot of old ones, didn't you?
Yeah, we done a couple of old ones. Strip them down and re-rib them, new decks and wheel hours, of course. And
what do you remember about the Dauntless?
there's a photo of it there too. They showed me a photo of it where they had about 30 bags of crays on it, stacked all around the mast, and then a rope tied around them to stop them from falling off. So it certainly earned them a few quid.
She was an odd shape, wasn't it?
Yeah, very billsy.
Mm. Yeah, like a jelly bean.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
Everyone used to do their apprenticeship on it. Well, one season on the Dauntless was like having 10 seasons on any other boat. Oh, God, it was a terrible boat. Oh, yeah.
You used to slip a lot of boats at Portland because there was a slip associated with the boat shed, wasn't there?
Yes, yeah, we had 3 cradles on, and one for big heavy stuff, and 2 smaller cradles for smaller boats, like cooter boats and whatever. Mm.
Yes, I can remember being up there many a time.
Yeah.
And of course, I remember once the Stankies tried to put 2 boats up on the big slip at once.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Can you tell us about that debacle?
Well, he thought that it'd be smart and put 2 boats on the one slip, but they said to him, well, if you do it on your own accord. If anything goes wrong, it's your own fault. But anyway, so they started, one boat went in, and they pulled it up until it was just about to go out the water, and then reversed the other one and tied it with ropes down to the bottom. But then the rope stretched and the boat started to skid, and the next minute she went. Yeah.
She fell right over?
Yeah, laid on the side, yeah.
Much damage?
No, very little. It sort of cracked one plank in between 2 ribs, and that was all, never like to drop.
The first 4 of the new boats were 46 feet, shoal draft, designed as day boats for fishing out of Carpenter Rocks. The first of these was the Muriel Knight, followed by the Eastern Queen, Almira and Warrain. These were followed up by the slightly smaller Cape Banks Robert William and Miss Portland.
They had no wells, they were dry boats, and they were all gyroplanked. Yeah, pretty solid. Yeah.
The 46-foot Almira was built in record time.
Yeah, we launched the boat that day, and the boss said, If there's enough timber in the yard, can you build another one to be ready by the start of the season, which was in 6 weeks? Yeah, no worries. We've got enough planking, everything. So we got half a dozen fellas together and carted all the big heavy timber in the shed ready, and then started on it virtually the following week. And many days I worked 12 hours, 7 days a week. Yeah, we had one fellow lighting he was looking after the steamer when we were ribbing it. We ribbed the whole boat in one day. When we planked it, there was about 4 or 5 of them nailing the planks on, and all I was doing, cutting planks one after the other, because for one side and then matched the one for the other side. And the boat was planked out of 6 by 1.5 Jarrah in 5 days. Nailed up and clenched.
When they built the Elmira, it was like fleas on a dog's back. People just doing jobs and the boat lasted for years and years and years. You know, there was you worked from daylight till dark.
The Elmira and her 3 sisters were lengthened out to 46 feet by Kettlers from a 42-foot design by Neil Cormack.
Yeah, they lengthened them out, and it changed the shape of the boats altogether. And the Warrane and the Mirror Knight and all them were 10 times better boats than what the Kerra Margaret was.
All these boats were unique in having no bulwarks or rail across the stern. This allowed ropes and buoys to run out over the stern unhindered.
Yes, I had a fair bit to do with the Stankies back in the mid-60s, late 60s. I leased the Kerra Margaret off them for 2 years and worked it out of Portland. And I also worked the Elmira for a couple of weeks during that period. And I'd agree with Ian that the likes of the Elmira and her sisters were a lot better boats. They're lovely boats. And they built me the little Linda Kay, last plank boat built in that shed. I don't remember signing any contract. It was all on a handshake, and I don't think anyone was disappointed. It was all good.
In the late 1960s, the von Stanke brothers turned their attention to building smaller, faster plywood boats.
Cheaper to build, quicker to build. They were a smaller boat. They could fish in different areas closer around this area here, where the older boats, the big old clunkers, would go down further down the coast and out deeper, where the little ones weren't suited for deep fishing.
Planting holes, the ply boats, and wow, this is fishing, this is what it's all about.
So it covered the whole spectrum from, inshore fishing to outshore, out deep.
Yeah, the old wooden boats, it's not, they're all right, but too much work. Too much work. I can pack them every year, paint them, bloody strip them back. That was just too much.
In 1968, Tony Kettlars left the business to work for Ron Stewart in his new shed at Port Fairy. Hammy Spence took over the Portland operation and built a further 4 plywood boats.
I was involved in building the Hartley designed Ocean Lady and Hercules 4, I think it was, along with the Seigneurie and the Caprice.
By 1973, von Stanke's boat building program was over. The business was sold to Bob Hodgson, who commenced building steel boats for local fishermen. Von Stanke's upgraded the size of their tractor and trailer and commenced hauling their boats out for maintenance at Carpenter Rocks, with obvious benefits in not having to travel, but the maintenance was the same.
Pull them out on the one trailer and jack them off and then go and get the next one, and just constant cycle of work.
Originally, the von Stanke brothers sold their catch to Fishbrooks, lobster processors at Port MacDonnell. In the mid-1960s, the family built their own factory.
Well, that started, I think, in 1965. We had trouble in selling our catches, we had trouble in holding them, and the only thing to do then was to try and export them, which we did.
This provided work for family members.
From a very young age, when the factory was first built, so the kids would hang around, come in, come out, grab some cooked spiders if we could, if there were any fresh ones, and they had to be fresh and straight out of the boiler. Otherwise, and I'm still the same, I don't eat them unless Alan, my husband, cooks them up and they're nice and fresh and warm. So as a very young child, probably, I tried to work out when, but I think round about the age of 10 is when I started picking. And there was my other cousins, my younger sister, cousin Rosemary, cousin Karen, and we used to get pocket money. Oh, actually, we got a pay packet, and at the end of the week or the fortnight, we actually got an official little pay packet with our name on it and how much we'd picked and how much we'd earned. And I thought that was pretty fancy. So we were very young, and we were taught how to pick the spiders correctly. We were taught how to, crack the knuckles and drag every little bit of lobster out, and it had to be done perfectly without any bits of shell or gristle or anything in there. We were taught how to get the knuckles out cleanly, and also whatever crayfish was inside the back of the lobster legs. But also from a young age, knowing the process from the time the lobster come in or were brought to the back of the factory and brought into the area where the lobster were killed or put on the knife, and the tail was taken away from the body and the legs. So the legs would then stay upstairs, and that they would go down a chute. And then I had my aunties and some other people there. So Auntie Mary, who was Bob Von Stanke's wife, many years she would do the poop chute, so that would be sucked out. So that was her job, and it would go along the processing line and have them tidied up and made looking like, take all the extra bits of gristle or whatever it was, and make their way to my mum, who was she used to grade them. So mum was Myra, she was Myra Von Stanke, so she's the baby of the 7 Von Stanke siblings, and she would then grade the fish and go into grading baskets. And the years that I worked there, I then took the grading fish and weighed them up to the correct weight that they needed to then be packed into the boxes and prepared for the freezer and ultimately to the US for export.
Well, as I said, we'd start in the morning at 10 o'clock and tail as the boats came in, and you'd go and have tea, and you come back and then later boats would be coming in. There'd be 80 bags, in these rooms just stacked basically to the roof, and the receivable area just chockers full of lobster, and you walk in there and tears would come to your eyes and sit there another few hours and tail all of those. So yeah, but that changed.
Lobster catches were very high during the 1950s and early 60s. There was a huge build-up in fishing pressure along the coast. New operators were entering the fishery every year. The numbers of lobster pots each boat was using was also increasing, and the Von Stanke family operation were leading the charge.
The boats were using at least 200 pots a day, some more. I heard Ron Guy, who was an uncle, he said he had pulled 200 before lunchtime and he still had pots to go. So however many he had, I don't know, but it was, well in the 200 mark. That's a lot of pots.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they just absolutely fished the hell out of it.
The 1st of November of 67 it would have been, away we went, and the amount of pots that were in the ocean, and of course you had the other ports on either side of us that had those many pots out too, so the ocean was absolutely full of pots.
We'd put them in and pull them again, so instead of pulling 200 pots in a day, you pull them 250. And we just got that many crayfish. Some days 20 bags, which is 800 kilos. The truck from Port Mac had come and pick them up, and it was a full international truck, and it was full to the top with bags of crayfish. They'd taken Portland to Port Macdonald to process them at Fishbrooks. We worked till May, and that was one of the seasons where we had 167 days straight. Went fishing 167 days straight.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everyone was worn out. We brought the pots home, and I was in hospital with exhaustion. So I spent 3 weeks in hospital because we worked that hard. As a 15-year-old, you know, you take it, but oh Jesus, it's hard.
I don't think too much concern was given to the fishery itself back then. You know, it appeared to be that there were plenty of fish about and they would last forever, but, you know, it doesn't happen, of course.
At this time, lobster fishing was a classic example of what economists refer to as the tragedy of the commons. This occurs when it is in no individual's financial interest to limit his harvest or exploitation of the resource in the interest of sustainability, while others continue to overfish. Finally, in 1967, the Fisheries Department implemented substantial changes in order to curb falling catch rates. A freeze was put on the issue of lobster fishing licenses, and limits were put on the number of pots that each boat could use. The formula used was 1 pot per foot of boat length plus 20 for the skipper and 20 for the crew, resulting in 90 pots for a 50-foot boat. This was not welcomed by some fishermen, especially those working upwards of 200 pots.
It was like one's throat was cut. You know, you're going from unlimited pots to ones that, well, you said you had so many pots per foot of your boat and whatever else. And it made a lot of difference, and they had to change the way they fished.
I think for the industry was the best thing that happened.
These restraints, placed on the rate of harvest, known as input controls, were only partially successful in ensuring the long-term sustainability of the fishery, but more about that later. The fisherman's life has become easier with the passage of time. Initially, the family made all their own pots and ropes, fished huge numbers of pots, maintained their timber boats, found their own bait, and processed their own catch. The work was unrelenting.
They used to fish a lot of pots, so that meant a lot of pots to be made and a lot of pot necks to be made and a lot of ropes.
It was a prick. That big shed up there, we used to fill it up.
We made 2,000 pots a year in the first year I was there, the first 2 years.
We had 2 or 3 making bottoms and 3 or 4 making spiders and others putting little rings in.
Little rings
and
in,
welding them up. Welding them up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but did the ladies do cane necks and things like that?
Yeah, we had.
In that little shed they did.
Yeah. Yeah, Honey Bill, Honey Myra, Suzanne, they used to, you know, weave the cane in the necks.
We used to help make the pot necks, which were made out of cane back in those days. So I don't remember where the cane come from or how it even arrived, but it was just in our big shed. And it was great big long coils that were tied up, and I never finished one off because I didn't know how to do it, but I used to do the weaving, and then an adult would come along behind me and finish the actual cane.
In the winter, all the men were all employed all through the winter.
Doing the farm work and shearing the sheep and
Painting boats. Painting boats.
painting boats.
So they'd go up the shed and you'd make complete 50 pots a day. We had 24 boats that were all working 200 pots. You got a lot of pots.
I started fishing in late 61. I was just on the end of the old ways, the old vegetable ropes, sisal ropes. That only lasts 6 months in salt water and you have to replace all your ropes. The netting covering the pots, the wire netting would rust out in 6 months. You had to replace all the wire netting. By the look of Von Stanke's pots on the back of this truck here, they used spiderweb bottoms. And weren't they a work of art? There was work everywhere. Those old glass floats, the nets had to be made for the glass floats. And that float's been dipped in tar to preserve the rope. Wouldn't do much for the glass. Tar was a universal preserver. They even tried dipping the cray pots in tar, as Ian remembers.
Used to have a tar pot and used to dip them in the tar. Wasn't that a great job? Oh, you get burn marks on you and that's a terrible job. Terrible. No one should go through that.
One labour-saving device was the purchase of an army duck. This was a great asset in taking bait, fuel and gear out to the moored boats and bringing the lobster catch ashore.
There was one specific episode when they were picked up a large chain and hauled it over the back of the army duck and hooked it to the winch, and they were dragging it along at the bottom. And Bob von Stanke was driving the duck at the time and was a little bit hard of hearing, and the chain hooked up, and of course with the weight on it, and she started to pull the back of the duck under the water, and all the crew on board started yelling at him to stop, but he didn't hear and kept going, and eventually the duck just went straight under the water. And the bullwinkle, had a International Harvester truck canopy on it, cabin, and everyone scrambled up on top of this cabin that was just so far above the water.
I remember coming home from school one day and coming around the corner, and Papa and Uncle Fred looked like they were standing on the water. The army duck sunk, they were standing on the roof. So.
In the years before pot limits, each boat needed to bait 200 pots every day. This was a very real problem. Packaged frozen bait was as yet unavailable.
But in the early days, whatever you could get, that's what you used. The ocean was full of barracuda. You could catch 1,000 pretty easily, and now they're not there.
They had about 40 or 50 horses up the paddock, and they went to shoot them, and we got some new people come down the rocks, and they come there, and they shot a couple of horses, and they cut the steaks off them and took them home and ate them. We were devastated, like we were only young kids, and they're eating horse, and we thought, oh, geez, this is bloody awful.
So how did you cut up a horse? With an axe or a cleaver or what?
Knife and axe, yeah. But yeah, and just go at it and chop it all up into usable pieces. Yeah, and it wasn't funny when you had to split the head with an axe. So you cut everything up into manageable pieces. Yeah, I was never impressed with that. Horses got a particular smell when you cut that meat up.
It would seem highly unusual today that fishermen would be using horses for crowbait, but it wasn't unheard of, along the South Australian coast especially. The old draft horse teams from the Mallee were being pensioned off, replaced by tractors. Truckloads of draft horses were brought down for crowbait. In the Border Watch newspaper, 1950, there were complaints from people at Port Macdonald seeing horses' heads and legs drifting past while bathing. And I seem to remember cray bodies being dumped over the cliff up towards the lighthouse. Things have improved since then, thankfully.
Yeah, so when we were young blokes and we'd be burning around on our BMX bikes, and the horses would come out from like just behind me here in the scrub, and you'd be wandering around town, or you'd get up to go for a ride on your motorbike, and there'd be eight or nine horses out in the front lawn eating the grass, and slowly one by one they all ended up in the freezer. So you go up and there'd be all sorts of stuff up there, and
cows all chopped up, great big legs and rib cages and heads just thrown in on top of one another, and you'd have to go in with a jemmy bar to break them apart because they were frozen. And then of course you'd have to let them thaw out and chop them up with an axe or a tomahawk or whatever, and yeah, that was an education, an eye-opener. Sheep's heads, cut them in half and put them in a pot. If you took them out of the boat and the weather come in rough, you never used to go out and get your bait and bring it back and put it in the freezer. It was left on the boat under black rubber mats, which created more heat. And yeah, they'd get pretty fly blown and smelly at times, and crawling in maggots, but they all went in the pot.
We were using sheep heads, and they got sharp bones on them, I can tell you.
We used to use sheep heads too, terrible things. They'd be split in half at the meatworks to get the brain out, but they'd have a guillotine. It would come down like that, but it had a piece scalloped out of it for the brain, and it would straddle the brain and sort of break the head open. So you had all these jagged bits of bone, and of course you'd get scratched with them, and they would infect, and they get sore as anything if you bump them. And of course we never wore gloves, be too sensible to wear gloves, so we always had infected fingers. I was glad when we finished with them.
We always had poison hands. We'd be at the doctor's and you'd have injections all the time because it was all the rubbish we were using.
We'd harpoon a porpoise and pull it on board and cut that up and use it for bait. And yeah, don't think I could do that now. I wouldn't want to do it now. They're such a nice animal.
Oh, we had kangaroo too, don't worry. Kangaroo, mainly kangaroo tails and backbones. But oh Jesus, that's caused that many poison hands, it's not funny. Oh, Sam Sampson, he got a poison finger once, and then he went by the time the end of the season, his finger had worn away and all that was left was bone. And they ended up chopping it off because it just died, his finger died from getting poisoned.
In order to ease the bait situation, Jack and son Ian decided to try electric fishing for European carp in northern Victoria.
We got this machine from Horse Fisher, an electro fisher, and you pulled a boat behind you had to have a fiberglass boat because it was all electric, and you had to tow an aluminium boat that they used to ground out the water. But if you touched anything when the net went in the water that had the bead around the edge, that the electrodes went into the water, you got these massive big electric shocks, and your hair used to stand on end and all this. Anyway, we were up at Hatter Lakes, and Dad jumped off the end of the boat because you could see this big school of fish, but he went down a post hole and he went up to his neck, and the net went in the water, and all his hair stood up on it. And I started laughing. Oh, geez, it was the worst thing I ever did. I copped it for weeks. But he'd load the truck up, and I'd bring it down here, unload the truck, get back at midnight at Swan Hill, and he'd wake me up again at 4 o'clock and say, "Come on, I'll let you sleep in for an hour." Back out we go again. He reckons if you had a spare minute you worked, you didn't.
Pretty lucky now. We get bloody fish nice and fresh and packed in boxes. And
The rock lobster grounds off Carpenter Rocks, and to the east and west, are very extensive and productive. Pots were set in more or less straight lines. Mostly the pick-and-shoot method was used, hauling and setting one pot at a time.
Well, you might move 50 metres, might be 100, but 50 metres I reckon would about covered it from if you were jumping in or jumping out as you pulled each pot. But and then they'd give you enough time to get it ready to be dropped, and then they'd be off to the next, and that's how they move through the ocean.
In shallow waters during periods of heavy swells, the rock lobster likes to stay in his hole and hang on, and only come to feed when conditions calm down. This is when the fisherman takes advantage and sets his pots close to rocks and reefs and offers Mr. Lobster a meal. However, the weather can change for the worse quickly, and then the fishermen are at a disadvantage.
Like I said, with Fearless,
Fearless Fred.
Yes, in getting the gear out in the big swell and glob it over the cabin, glob it over the rear of the boat when we're pointing to the coast. That much water inside the cabin. Just hold on, grab the winch and Gary, the other deckhand, he was washed down the back and hanging on to the staunching on the bulwarks there.
Boys, they talked about the old fellas and rivalry. Because there was the Cray Bottom out there. They had their own little imaginary pegged out areas where Uncle Fred would fish the front to the lighthouse, back to the east. Dad would fish from the lighthouse back to the west. Uncle Jack would predominantly fish the deeper water. And they dare not tread on each other's toes. And if they did, their
my twin.
Their pots would be ejected from the area. And dare I say it, anyone else, they didn't like it. Very possessive.
At one point, to stop any tourist or anybody coming in, they put a gate up and a fence across the road, which of course was not accepted by the authorities. So, but it was just to let you know that they were the lord and gentry of the area, and that's how it was.
Yeah, the family's always been quite territorial. I heard lots of stories younger, and well, when it was my turn to start setting some pots, I got told on more than one occasion that I wasn't welcome in areas by my uncles. I hadn't done enough time. That's something that they were accustomed to. They weren't allowed to fish in areas that their dads were fishing, and well, I suppose it'd be my time later on.
And we've grown up with that ingrained in us.
It's installed in us.
And as much as it hurts, we have to share it between us these days.
There was 1 year old Chris fucking stripped me down. Stripped me down because I had pots inside him. He had 3 rows, boom, 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 and I had 1 row in the middle of one of them, and turns out it was his second to last day. It didn't even fucking matter.
For 30-odd years, the Von Stanke operation had been run on company lines, with 3 directors and everyone else, from skippers and crews to factory management and staff, employed on wages. While wages were not high, there were other benefits thrown in, such as houses for married couples, plus power and phone. There were quarters for the single men, with meals and cut lunches supplied. Buildings were erected randomly on Fred's 30 acres. In the 1950s, Carpenter Rocks resembled a shanty town, but this improved over time.
The family, like I said to you, had to build a town to get employees to come here and work and give them some accommodation, whether it be board, whether they build them a house, pay for their telephone, pay for their electricity, and anything that went wrong, it was all paid for, all within their wages. So wages weren't great, but the fringe benefits were far outweighed anything else.
So we were on wages right up until 1986. Then we went on the shares.
The downside of the wages was that the skippers that were getting paid on wages just didn't care. They'd go out, pull half their gear, come home. Or if it blew 10 knots, I'd stay home. I'm not going out and that. But that was the downside of it. And that was why we went to percentage per catch.
Once we went on to shares, well, then the factory got built properly, and then we started with the live export.
I think that was the start of the good times. You know, we had the Japanese market come on for the smaller, especially for the smaller fish. Then Taiwan come on after that and took the smaller fish, and so we had 2 countries buying small fish. Then China come on, Hong Kong come on buying the bigger fish. So yeah, that was the start of the really good times in the beach price, as you know, and as life come up.
As the live lobster market developed throughout the 1980s, the factory needed to be rebuilt to cater for live export, including tanks, circulating systems, biofilters, and export packing facility. The resulting system was the envy of the industry.
The younger fellas, we developed the Chinese market and kept that going, and I think in one of our better years there was like 400 tonne of live to the Chinese market. Oh. So yeah, that was it, and it went away from no more tails. That finished in the late 80s because there's not enough money in it.
Improved lobster prices, brought about by live export, coincided with the introduction of the share system, where the fishermen received a percentage of the catch. This gave them the ability to purchase their own modern boats, though the company retained the fishing licenses. These were leased to the operators, also on a percentage of the catch basis.
You can see the type of boats that we have here now. Aluminium, fiberglass, modern, high-powered, fast boats, modern technology.
Within a few short years, the older timber boats, which were the pride of the fleet 20 years earlier, were pensioned off, to sit on the hill like so many Easter Island statues, silent reminders of a bygone era.
Gary, there's no comparison between the old wooden boats and the boats we've got today.
No comparison. Just technology, maintenance, fuel cost. No, not so much fuel cost now, but fuel burn, way better, comfier, a bit easier on your body.
The speed provided by the fast boats allows for safer entry into the bay in big seas, with waves travelling at anything up to 20 knots.
Get on the back of one, and once she fizzles out, then sort of, flat out and in the little gap.
A freeze on the issue of new lobster licences were introduced in 1967, along with pot limits. Subsequent pot reductions and seasonal closures were implemented, but catch per unit of effort continued to fall. Catch quotas, known as output controls, were introduced in 1993 and remain the main management tool today. Catch quotas were, and are, based on the number of pots owned, or pot units, up to a maximum of 100 per boat. Again, not everyone was happy.
There was a bit of a shit fight over the quota, as you know, between past history and all the other big guys who were out there.
Looking back at it now, you can understand the catch history guys trying to fight for it. They thought would be theirs.
A lot more enjoyable once the quotas come in. It made a different world for us. Didn't have that pressure to go to sea unless the price was right. If the prices dropped off, which they could easy enough, then you could say, well, have a day off.
Whatever, a day off if you want to without feeling bad about it. It's just made fishing a lot better, I think.
Lobster catch quotas have been in place for over 30 years now. The Von Stanke fleet has been rationalised to half what it once was.
But the industry is looking very good at the moment. It's very strong.
Modern boats, individually owned and requiring far less maintenance, have replaced the old company-owned timber boats. Bait comes frozen in clean cartons. No more cutting up horses, kangaroos and sheep's heads for bait. No more poisoned hands, for the deck hands have taken up wearing gloves. The old gear shed is quiet now, with pot making being outsourced in the modern way. Sons, grandsons, and even great-grandsons of Fred and Bob Von Stanke carry on the lobstering today and appear to be content with their lot.
We used to love watching the tray boats, you know, and the characters in and around them.
But it was a good place to grow up, and I've got lots and lots of fond memories.
No better place to grow up than the Rocks.
We've done what we liked when we wanted.
We worked our guts out. We worked their guts out, and Ian included.
The early part of my life, from 15 to 18, was when I worked with Dad, was probably the best time of my life.
Because anyone that's been on a boat with a grouchy skipper, it made it hard day in and day out to go and face that same rubbish again tomorrow. It could be a big sea and they're grouchy, they're not catching crayfish, so they didn't like the world. But overall, I did enjoy fishing. The family were good to be with in the early days, young days. We all got on extremely well together.
I'm very fortunate to be part of our family. Probably one of the prime things, Gary, is we have it's unwritten, it's unsaid, we agree to disagree. We have to. We've lived together. I've moved 100 metres from my family home to the home I'm currently in. We see each other every day. Do we talk? Mostly. Sometimes, no. But we are very fortunate. Very fortunate.
Great time, great memories, great family, and yeah, that's what it's all about, really.
Well, without us ever talking about it, Chris said this is the best time to be fishing because we've still got our uncles.
Yep.
And we've got the next lot of family coming through, and we're all still healthy, happy, and we're all fishing together because said time's going to go by and their uncles are going to. They're not ever going to retire.
No.
But they'll pass on, and we'll be talking about the good old days.
Get to fish alongside my old man, my uncles, cousins. Got my son on the boat, so it's pretty good.
I think it's a great family. I really do.
They were a little bit wild at times, but on the whole, it was still a very loving family community.